I didn't talk about it for months. Not because I forgot. Not because I wanted to pretend it didn't happen. But because every time I tried to explain it, I could see disappointment on people's faces before I even finished the first sentence. They leaned in, waiting for the parts they thought mattered. The parts they had already imagined. They expected shouting. They expected gunfire. They expected chaos, men screaming orders, vehicles burning, panic ripping through the air. They expected noise. That wasn't what happened. What happened to me was quieter than that. So quiet that it didn't feel like something that should be called a crime at first. So controlled that my body didn't even understand what kind of danger it was in until much later. That quiet is the reason it stayed with me. Noise fades. Silence settles. And silence has a way of replaying itself when everything else goes still late at night, when the road outside your house is empty, when your phone buzzes unexpectedly, when you hear footsteps that pause for half a second too long. That's when it comes back. I knew that road. That was the problem. It wasn't some strange route I had never seen before. It wasn't a desperate shortcut or a risky decision made in a moment of impatience. It was a road I had taken dozens of times, early mornings when the sky was still pale, late evenings when the sun had already surrendered, and sometimes at night when work ran longer than planned and all I wanted was my bed. I knew where the bends were. I knew where the trees thickened. I knew the places where phone signal usually dropped for a few minutes before returning. Familiarity does something dangerous to the mind. It replaces caution with routine. People warned me, of course. They always do. Don't travel late. That road is not safe after dark. Anything can happen. But warnings lose their sharpness when nothing has happened yet. They become background noise, something you acknowledge politely and then store away under things that apply to other people. That evening, the road looked normal. Too normal. No checkpoints. No abandoned vehicles by the roadside. No movement that looked out of place. Just darkness stretching ahead and the steady hum of my engine filling the silence inside the car. I remember checking the dashboard clock and calculating the distance in my head. If traffic stayed light, if nothing delayed me, I would be home in about 40 minutes. I even thought about what I would eat when I got there. That small, ordinary thought still haunts me, because it reminds me how unaware I was of how close I already was to something irreversible. I was wrong about the 40 minutes.
They didn't announce themselves. There was no dramatic roadblock made of burning tires. No gunshots fired into the air to force attention. No shouting. A motorcycle crossed slowly in front of my car. Not suddenly. Not aggressively ... Slow enough that my foot moved to the brake without my mind giving the order. Then another motorcycle appeared behind me. That was when time started to stretch. I slowed instinctively, not because I was told to, but because something in my body recognized a pattern my mind hadn't fully processed yet. That was the moment I understood something important. They weren't rushing. People who rush are reacting. People who rush are improvising. These men weren't reacting to me. They had already decided. A man stepped forward from the side of the road and raised his hand. Not aggressively, not urgently, calmly. That calm unsettled me more than shouting ever could. It felt practiced, rehearsed, like someone performing a task they had done many times before. I remember thinking, this is not how panic behaves. They didn't drag me out of the car. They didn't yank the door open. They asked me to step down. That detail matters. I remember how normal their voices sounded. Not harsh, not excited, not angry. Just flat, controlled. One of them even said, almost apologetically, "Sorry, this will be quick if you cooperate." That sentence still echoes in my head, because it told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't emotional. This wasn't personal. It was procedural. They weren't there to express power. They were there to complete a process, and I was just the next step in it.
They took my phone first. Not roughly. No snatching. No struggle. They removed the SIM card and battery with the ease of someone who had done it many times before. Their fingers moved confidently, without hesitation. That's when I felt the first real separation from the world I knew. From the idea that someone could reach me if things went wrong. Then they told me to walk. Not fast, not slow. Match our pace. The road disappeared behind us quickly, swallowed by the bush. I remember the smell of dust rising with each step, dry leaves cracking underfoot. The way my breathing suddenly sounded too loud in my own ears. No one spoke. That silence wasn't accidental. It was discipline. I had imagined something different. Tents thrown together in a hurry. Men moving chaotically. Shouting. Confusion. What I saw instead was order. People sitting in small groups. Weapons leaned carefully against trees, not scattered. A cooking fire off to the side. Controlled. Contained. Someone was charging phones with a small generator. That was the moment reality settled in. This wasn't a hideout. It was a base. A place meant to function.
They didn't blindfold me. They didn't beat me. They gave me water. That confused me more than violence would have. Fear is easier to process when cruelty is obvious. When pain announces itself clearly, the mind knows what category to place it in. This was different. They wanted me calm, because calm people listen. Calm people comply. Calm people survive long enough to be useful. That realization sat heavily in my chest as night deepened around the camp. They asked about my family, not aggressively, not emotionally, methodically. Who would answer the phone first? Who made financial decisions? Who panicked easily? As they spoke, I realized something unsettling. They already knew parts of the answers. They weren't discovering information. They were confirming it. That was when I understood something truly terrifying. They had done homework. Time behaved strangely there. There were no clocks, no dates, just routines, morning movements, long afternoons of waiting, evenings filled with low conversation among them. Sometimes they laughed. That disturbed me more than anger would have, because laughter meant comfort, and comfort meant permanence. Fear didn't make me scream. It made me calculate. Every word, every movement, every pause. I learned quickly that fear in that place wasn't loud. It was disciplined.
No one rushed to me. No one demanded answers the moment the sun rose. That delay was intentional. I understood that later. They weren't in a hurry because they didn't need to be. The power dynamic had already been established. Time was on their side, not mine. Eventually, someone approached and squatted a short distance away, not too close, not too far. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't threaten me. He asked a simple question. "Did you sleep?" I nodded. He acknowledged it with a small movement of his head, as if ticking a box in his mind. That was when it fully settled in. I wasn't being held by emotion. I was being handled by a system. The questions resumed, but not all at once. They came in pieces, spread out across the morning and into the afternoon. The same themes returned, slightly rearranged. Family, work. Movement patterns. People who depended on me. They asked the same questions in different ways, at different times. That wasn't a mistake. That was verification. They were listening for inconsistency, not information. I learned to answer carefully, not too fast, not too slowly, calm enough to appear cooperative, controlled enough not to reveal panic. It felt like walking on thin glass, every step calculated, every word weighed. At one point, someone mentioned a detail I hadn't said out loud, a small thing, something ordinary, but it wasn't something a stranger should know. That was the moment fear sharpened into something colder. They weren't just operating in the bush. They were connected to places I had come from, to routines I had assumed were private, to patterns I hadn't realized were visible. That realization changed how I saw everything that followed. This wasn't random. I wasn't unlucky. I had been selected. Days passed, or maybe it was fewer than I remember. Time there did not move in straight lines. It looped, it stretched, it compressed. Without a clock, the mind invents its own markers. Hunger became one, light became another, fatigue became a third. I learned to measure time by how many times the fire was fed, how often voices shifted from alert to relaxed, how shadows moved across the ground. Waiting became the hardest part. Not pain, not fear. Waiting. No one told me how negotiations were going. No updates. No reassurance. That uncertainty was deliberate. Uncertainty weakens resistance. It makes the mind restless, searching for patterns that don't exist. It pushes you toward compliance even when no new demands have been made. Every sound in the bush startled me. A snapped twig felt like an announcement. A sudden silence felt like a decision being made somewhere else. Yet the men around me remained patient, because patience was their advantage. They knew something I didn't. They knew the end of the story. When they finally allowed me to speak to my family, it was done without ceremony. A phone was handed to me, not thrown. not shoved, placed carefully, as if it were fragile. Someone stood close enough that I could feel their presence without seeing them directly. I was given instructions before the call. What to say, what not to say, how long to speak. I nodded. I remember the sound of the call connecting more clearly than the voice that answered. Hearing someone I loved nearly broke the control I had built inside myself. I had to slow my breathing consciously. Every word felt like it was passing through a filter before leaving my mouth. At one point, emotion rose unexpectedly. Not panic, not tears, something quieter, something that threatened to crack my composure. That was when a voice beside me corrected me. Softly, don't exaggerate, it makes things complicated. That sentence told me everything. They didn't want drama, they didn't want attention, they wanted payment, and they wanted the process to remain smooth.
When the call ended, the phone was taken away without comment. No reaction, no approval, no disapproval. I was left alone with the echo of my own voice in my head. I replayed every sentence, every pause, every breath. I wondered if I had said too much, or too little. That self-interrogation became a habit. It filled the long hours that followed. At some point during the wait, someone brought me food, not thrown on the ground, placed. That detail mattered more than it should have. The mind struggles when kindness and threat exist in the same space. It blurs categories that are usually clear. I didn't trust it. I didn't refuse it either. Survival is pragmatic. There were moments when I wasn't being addressed at all. Moments when the men around me spoke to each other as if I were furniture. That was when I learned the most. I watched how decisions were made not loudly, not dramatically, but through brief exchanges, nods, pauses. Leadership did not announce itself. It revealed itself through deference, through who others waited for before acting, through who did not need to raise their voice to be heard. At first, fear tells you that your situation is unique, that this has never happened before, that it is somehow different because it is happening to you. That illusion didn't last. I heard references to others. Not names, not stories, just indications that this process was familiar. That realization was sobering. It meant my survival would not come from sympathy. It would come from predictability. Nights were harder than days. Darkness removes distractions. It leaves you alone with thought. I replayed my life in fragments. Not as a dramatic montage, but as ordinary memories, conversations I hadn't finished, routines I had assumed would continue, plans that now felt strangely distant. Fear didn't scream, it whispered. What if the negotiation failed? What if someone made a mistake? What if patience ran out? Those questions circled endlessly. Sleep came in fragments. There was a point when I stopped trying to track how long I had been there. Counting had become exhausting. Hope and despair were too closely tied to imagined timelines. So I let go of the calendar inside my head. That surrender brought an unexpected calm. Not peace, acceptance. Subtle things shifted, not announced, not explained. The way people spoke around me changed slightly. The pauses grew longer, the instructions fewer. Something was happening beyond my awareness. I sensed movement in the system, and I waited.
I didn't know it was the day anything would change. There was no announcement, no signal, no visible preparation. That was the pattern I had learned by then. Important things in that place never arrived loudly. I noticed it first in the pauses. The spaces between actions grew longer. Conversations stopped halfway and resumed later, as if decisions were being weighed elsewhere. Someone who usually checked on me did not appear at the usual time. Another man avoided meeting my eyes entirely. That absence said more than words. The system was moving, and I was inside it, waiting for the outcome. Hope is not always comforting. In that place, hope felt like a liability. It made the mind race ahead, imagining outcomes that could easily be reversed. It made disappointment sharper, heavier, so I tried not to lean into it. I kept my expectations flat, my emotions muted. I told myself, nothing has happened yet. That mental discipline was the only control I still had. When they finally spoke to me, it was done plainly. No build-up, no explanation. One of them came close and said, "You will leave today." That was it. No congratulations, no reassurance, just information. For a moment, I didn't respond, not because I didn't understand the words, but because my body didn't know what to do with them. Relief and fear collided so suddenly that they canceled each other out. I waited for conditions. They came immediately. You will walk straight. You will not turn back. You will not run. Each instruction was delivered calmly, as if describing a route, not a release from captivity. I nodded. There was no ceremony, no dramatic untying meant to mark the moment. They loosened the restraints with efficiency and stepped away. That was all. No one watched me leave. That detail stays with me, because it told me something important. I was no longer the focus of the system. The system had already moved on.
I started walking, not quickly, not slowly, exactly as instructed. Every step felt unreal, like my legs were operating independently of my thoughts. I expected something to stop me, someone to call out, to correct my pace, to change their mind. Nothing happened. The bush closed around me again. But this time, the direction was different. Instead of leading deeper, open outward. That reversal was disorienting. I realized then how deeply my sense of direction had been stripped away. I had learned the bush as a cage, not a path. I walked until my legs burned. Not the sharp pain of injury, but the dull ache of muscles asked to do something they hadn't done freely in days. Sweat soaked my clothes. My mouth felt dry, but I didn't stop. I didn't trust stillness anymore. I listened constantly. Every sound behind me felt like a test. Every rustle ahead felt like a threat. I didn't look back. Not once. I focused on the rhythm of my steps, counting them in my head, using numbers to keep my thoughts from spiraling. At some point, the bush thinned. That moment felt almost unreal. When I finally saw the road, it didn't look the way I remembered it. It was just asphalt, just lines painted on the ground, but it felt enormous, open, exposed. I stopped at the edge of it and stood there longer than necessary, staring, as if waiting for it to confirm it was real. Only then did my body realize what had happened. That was when the shaking started. Not violent, uncontrollable. My hands trembled, my knees weakened, my breath caught in uneven patterns. The danger was over, but my body hadn't received the message yet.
People talk about freedom as relief. What I felt first was confusion. Noise overwhelmed me. The open space felt unsafe. My instincts were still tuned to containment, to rules, to watching faces for cues. I didn't know where to stand. I didn't know how long it was safe to remain visible. That disconnect frightened me more than captivity had. Because captivity had rules, freedom felt unstructured. The first voices I heard outside that place startled me. They were too loud, too casual. People spoke as if nothing unusual had happened in the world. That normalcy felt almost offensive at first. I answered questions mechanically. I followed instructions without processing them fully. My mind lagged behind my actions, still adjusting to the idea that I no longer needed permission to move. Home did not fix everything. It was quiet. It was familiar. But I wasn't the same person who had left. People expected gratitude, relief, closure. What they didn't understand was that something fundamental had shifted inside me. I noticed exits everywhere. I listened too closely to footsteps. I woke up before dawn without knowing why. The world hadn't changed. My relationship to it had. People asked questions. Were they brutal? Did they hurt you? How bad was it? I struggled with those questions because they assumed the wrong metric. The absence of visible cruelty did not make the experience gentle. The lack of chaos did not make it safe. The real danger wasn't violence. It was normalization.
No one asked the question that mattered most. They didn't ask, how did they make it feel normal? Because that's the real threat. When systems of harm operate quietly, predictably, efficiently, they stop looking like emergencies. They begin to look like inevitabilities. That's when they become hardest to fight. Some things never left. I still pause at unfamiliar roads. I still avoid traveling late when I can. I still scan runes instinctively, measuring distances, exits, people. Not because I expect it to happen again, but because I now understand how easily order can exist inside something dangerous. Bandit operations are not sustained by violence alone. They are sustained by systems, by planning, patience, predictability, silence. They thrive where fear becomes routine and attention fades. They survive not because people scream, but because people stop expecting protection. I eventually decided to speak because silence protects the wrong things. not the victims, the systems. Telling this story isn't about shock. It isn't about drama. It's about understanding how quietly danger can organize itself and how easily it can be underestimated. The most frightening crimes are not the loud ones. They are the ones that don't announce themselves. Don't look chaotic. Don't feel emotional. They operate calmly. They operate patiently. And they wait for familiarity to do the rest. If you want more real crime stories, not headlines, not rumors, but experiences told from the inside, subscribe. Because the most dangerous systems don't need noise. They only need time.